Okay, well, welcome everybody to Rabbi and Rebbe on the Torah portion, where you can join my friend Rick and I as we discuss the week's Torah portion and try to find applicability to our lives. So let's get right to it. It's a pretty short parsha and verses, but some, like always, big ideas. Rick, what struck your fancy?
So I saw this week's Parsha as sort of a psychological thriller. It's, there's a lot of questions that sort of, because it's not concrete, it's very abstract in its approach to things. I have some questions. First is, in the Parsha this week, is God requiring us to have blind faith? And then does God want us to submit our individuality, in other words, our ego, in order to find our divine self? And then what does that look like?
So before I answer, to give the people a nutshell of what the parsha is on, it's only a few things. First of all, it starts off promising if you toil in the Torah and live by the mitzvahs in a full-hearted way, you will have blessing. It gives different blessings about, physical, agricultural bounty, peace, and so on. If you don't, then it goes into a series of what we refer to as the teichacha, the consequences of not keeping our part of the godly covenant, which are very horrific punishments, or as I said, consequences. So that's the first part of the parsha. Then it talks about some laws about making vowing pledges of different forms of money to the temple treasury.
That comes later in the tithe. That comes later in the tithing at the end of the parsha.
And then there's tithing. Well, right. There's tithing was the final thing. But before that, it's really the middle of the parsha talks about the we call the erchin. It was like a certain mechanism for giving a donation. It says, I pledge, Rabbi Hein's worth to the temple. What does that look like? It was a mechanism of, well, Rabbi Hein is between 20 and 60, and what that means is a certain amount of money he's going to give.
You're worth 50 shekels, just so you know.
Right, but not literally, because
No.
It was sort of a Torah formula of how people would pledge money. And
it's a metaphor for charitable giving.
Right. Well, it's more than a metaphor. It's actually a mechanism.
Okay.
Say right. Like this equals this amount. When you say this, it means this amount of money. Anyways, but so your question was about submitting to God's will, losing our individuality. How much does God expect of that? And you're saying this in reference to the questions in the beginning, the portion of, if you do the Torah and mitzvahs, great, lots of blessing. If you don't, there will be bad stuff. It sounds like carrot and stick.
Right, and I'm just wondering, is that what I mean? He frees us, from bondage, so we become individuals, and then somehow now we're back. I don't consider that bondage, but I mean, in some way we've submitted ourselves in a way that is less than free will specifically.
So if you remember back to the original Exodus, in Shemais, Moshe says, let my people go. It's half a sentence. It ends off, let my people, God said, Pharaoh, to say the message, let my people go so that they shall serve me. I mean, the whole,
we forgot the end of that.
play cards of, the Soviet protests against, for Soviet Jewry, it didn't have the second part of the sign. It's because really, what is freedom? This gets to what's freedom. Is freedom, I saw a line. I saw a line by some celebrity, not even so relevant today, but said to the point, like, I'm open to any urge that's inside of me.
That's not good.
But he was saying like as if it's a good thing, like meaning, is that freedom to be beholden to any urge or any whim we have inside of us? We know that society can't function on that at an extreme level, right?
Right.
So you say, well, you can't hurt other people, but your personal conduct, you should be free to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. That's utilitarianism. And that is a secular philosophy. But Judaism and Torah and God, the creator of us, is really trying to get us to be what we would argue is truly free. And free is not to be beholden to your whims or your addictions or even your desires. Right? The real freedom is when you can transcend all of that. Of course, we have needs. Of course, we have physical, emotional needs. But I'll give you the famous metaphor. And they tell this story in Alcoholics Anonymous in recovery meetings, but it's a great lesson for everybody. There's a guy, Joe, who was walking alone on the street. He was driving, and he's thinking how miserable his life is. He's a failure, didn't make it at work. He doesn't have a good relationship with his wife and kids, and he's just really feeling down. So suddenly a booming voice from heaven comes out and says, "Joe, you look so down. What's going on?" "Is that you, God?" "Yes." "Well, I'm really down because, my life is really not going well and I want new life." And God says, "You're in luck. There's a special today in heaven." The special is, you can just ask for a new life. You can, what do you have in your wallet? $20. It's a special. For $20, you can get a brand new life. Joe's like, "That's great, but if I give you my $20, I won't be able to buy gas for my car." "Oh, wait, God, you have a car? Well, the special's still a pretty good deal, but actually the price went up. It's $20 plus a car. You got to give that to get a new life." He says, "But if I give you my car, how am I going to get to my job?" "Oh, you have a job? I didn't realize that. Sorry, the deal's it's not the final draft of this deal. It's $20 a car and then your job in order to get a new life." Joe says, "But if I don't give you my job, then I won't be able to make money to support my family." "Oh, you have a family? Well, it's $20 a car, job plus you have to get your family to get a new life." So he says, Joe's thinking it over, and he says, "I'm so down. You can have it all. Give me a new life." And God tells Joe, "Well, okay, deal's on, and here's how it's going to work. Here's your family back, but now it's my family, not your family. And you have to treat them as if they're mine, as my agent, to treat God's family as appropriate. And I'm giving you back your car. You can drive it, or your job. You have to engage your job as I ask you to engage in it, not as yours. It's mine. You can have it. You're now my custodian of it. You can have your car back with the drive, and you can have your money back to do with what I determine." So that's the new life. And that's really a good example of what Torah is and Judaism is. It's saying the whole world is God. We believe in a creator. We believe that God is this ongoing relationship. Nothing is really ours. Nothing's really ours. But yet God gifts us or makes us trustees of all this stuff, all these blessings. And when you have that initial way of looking at it, you have this humility to look at life as that it's all God's stuff. And oh my gosh, God is choosing me to be the administrator or the custodian of all this stuff. So there's two things that come out of that. One is, on one hand, you are very empowered. You're designated by the King of Kings to be the executioner, the administrator of all this stuff, to use it out for blessing and goodness and kindness. So there's a lot of individuality there. At the other hand, it's individuality with a tremendous dose of humility that you're not in a vacuum. So it's incredible empowerment at the end of the day. It is individuality with incredible empowerment to engage in all this stuff. First and foremost, ourselves, our bodies, our next sphere, our family, our community, to really engage in. And that is really, when you ask the question, it's always the answer, is it A or B? It's always C. It was given on the third day of the week. And it was given, it says in the Gemara, it was given by the third born. Moshe was the third born, Miriam, Aaron, Moshe, to a threefold people, Kohanim, Leviim, Israelim, on the third day of the week. And there's other threes, because it's always about, it's not one, just oneness. It's not two, it's not plurality. It's about three. It's always about reaching a higher truth that can transcend it all and bring it all together. And this, I think, gets to the heart of the question. The big question people have in the parsha is like, come on, God, if you do good, carrot, you get blessing. You do bad, horrific consequences, which unfortunately we see in history happen by the destruction of the temples. It seems very unfair. God's like this, as the other religions called the vengeful God of the Old Testament.
You've given me the opportunity to understand better what my divine self is. Thank you.
We're all trying to, it's easy to say, it's very empowering to remember this, because this is really, I think, the Rebbe's message. But back to the idea of how be so many horrific, consequences, is that Judaism, the Jewish people were chosen. What does that mean? It means to be a people that are literally an incarnate of God's will on earth in a very palpable way. They say the story that Louis XVI asked Pasteur, I think it was Pasteur, you have proof of God. And he said, the Jews saw, Your Majesty, the Jews. The Jews are choosing to be a people of God's presence and will on earth. But by our mere existence is statistically improbable by a long stretch. No other ancient people displaced from the land exist. There are no Vikings or Babylonians today. And beyond that, in our psyche, the Jewish psyche is bound up with a higher calling. And that's why you find Jews are always radical. They're not, philosophers, non-Jewish philosophers talk about this. Like, why were Jews so unsettled? Why are they so crazy? They make this ism and that ism. We're inextricably bound up with God's will and presence. So it makes sense that if we live up to it, there's going to be blessing. It's because we're letting it flow. We're letting, it's like saying, if we stop breathing, we'll die. It's in our DNA that we're human beings. We're autonomous human beings. We seem to be regular folk like everybody else. At the same time, we're empowered in this sort of epigenetic, spiritual DNA bound up with God's will. And if we stop, we're literally cutting off our DNA, which results in some bad stuff. In God's grace, we live in a time when a lot of Jews, all of us, we're not living up to the way we should. All of us at different levels. We all know.
Sure. So let me ask you. So we talked about the carrot and the stick. So let me ask you this question first. Is the poverty and hunger that we see today a result of our inability to follow and study the Torah completely, right? In order to maintain the rules as they're laid out for us, And is suffering sort of a path to the divine self? Is that what God wants of us?
So it's a great question. In general, as a second question first, suffering is an expiation of sin. It's looked at that, but it's not a path. It's not something where we idolize suffering. Suffering is kind of like a cleansing process, but it's a de facto, it's after the fact. But back to the second question, why poverty? The reason is poverty and imperfection in the world. Is it the Jews' fault, or is it humanity's fault because we're not moral? I think there are things we bring upon ourselves. There's no fact. There's no question, even by secular, standards, that people live in, relative. Everything there's different levels of morality, what that means. But there's no question, living a moral life simply brings a better quality of life, financially, emotionally, familial. It's a fact. We don't need the Torah to tell us that. The fact that with all that, there are very good people that suffer and there's poverty. Not everybody that suffers or is poor is immoral. This is part of what we call exile. The world is right now in this embryonic state or in this dreamlike state. These are metaphors using the Torah, where things don't always make sense. Because it's almost like sleep. When you're sleeping, you have dreams. You're not working at full capacity. Your mind can dream up wacky things, and what's up can be up and down can be down. We're in a dreamlike state. I mean, it's real, but it's relative to the way things should be, where the good prosper and the bad don't. That's what we call Mashiach. That's a world perfected. That's a awake time. So now we're in this dreamlike state, relative. The more, of course, it's not like the Matrix, where we're like God's in control. We have no power. We have power. We have power to push the system, to push the dreamlike state by doing more good against all odds, and not always questioning, why don't I see the good is rewarded? And that's our job in this time, with our dreamlike state of exile, and still with our hands tied behind our backs, we still come out. We do good. That gives God tremendous pleasure, and it makes us part of the process of pushing the system to become the time of Mashiach, the time of when things are the way they should be. There are no poor. And it's interesting to note, and this ties into the idea of blessing, carrot and stick, or blessing for doing God's will and consequences of not. Maimonides actually says in his Mishnah Torah that how does the Torah, it's interesting, you think about it, the Torah is a religious book. It says you do God's will, you get good bounty. You make a 6-figure salary. That's what it says. It seems kind of cheap to say, do God's will so you can have a yacht or you can have physical plenty. It seems that's what it's about. Isn't a great religionist someone who, isn't a great religionist someone who's doesn't care about that stuff, really wants to do good for the good sake, or to connect to a higher reality? Why? It's almost never explicitly said in the Torah. In the Talmud, yes. In the prophets, yes. But in the Torah, it doesn't outwardly say you get heaven or you get enlightenment. It's always physical reward. It seems so odd. And we'll finish off on this point. Maimonides says it's almost like that is not the actual reward. When God says you get physical bounty for doing mitzvahs and living a moral life, that's not the reward. Of course, the reward is connected to God. It's connected to doing good. It's connected to the good for the good sake. The fact that it tells you the good is because it's assuring you that if you're working on God's team, God will take care of your expense account. If you're becoming an ambassador, God will pay the ambassador's expense account. And that there will be palpable. The Rebbe would actually be interesting. The Rebbe in our time, he said, we're living in a time of tremendous prosperity. And the Rebbe said Jews should not idolize. In the olden days, there was a certain virtue of being poor because it was this asceticism. Today, we don't look to be poor. We look to be financially stable, to have extra money so we can give extra charity, do a lot of good things, be game changers, world changers. But that's not the reward. That's not the act. That's the expense account. So this ties into Mashiach. Is Mashiach? It says in Maimonides, the end of his book of Mishnah Torah, he ends off with the laws of Mashiach. I mean, because all the Torah is to lead up to this time Mashiach. Prophets, they did not look for the days of Mashiach because they wanted to eat and drink and be merry and have no financial worries, not to worry about pogroms. That wasn't what they were dreaming and waiting for the days of Mashiach. They're waiting for the days of Mashiach because of the time the human being will study the wisdom of God infinitely, get to know our true selves, and rung after rung, and will be like this, the wisdom of God and God's presence will envelop the world in an open way, with all the good happening and all the feeling connected happening, like the water covers the sea. But that's really what it's about. All the Mashiach and all the blessings of that time, which is kind of the similar blessings of, because the world will be in a Torah mitzvah state, so there'll be blessing. That's not what it's about. The bound is about connecting to our true selves and to God and connecting to other people in the truest way. So that's what we wait for, what Mashiach is about. And now we're in the sort of the end of this dreamlike state. We're seeing already cracks, as Leonard Cohen said, we're seeing cracks, light comes in. We're seeing a lot of cracks. We're seeing a lot of light. We're seeing a lot of brokenness as well. We're even seeing light in the brokenness. In fact, there's some crazy stuff, but we're seeing good come out of the crazy stuff. The bad stuff is bad, and we need Mashiach to come to end it. But we're seeing a lot of we're seeing a lot of light opportunities today, more than any time in history. Every individual can literally change the world with a YouTube account, with an Instagram account. You know, it's crazy. The power an individual has today is. I want to end off with a great line I heard 2 weeks ago, and it blew my mind because it ties into almost anything in Judaism, whether it's about connecting to Judaism, connecting to God, or connecting to Mashiach, which is all intertwined. The Rebbe, at the end of his life in the 90s, was pushing, let's bring Mashiach, let's do it, let's tip the scales, let's make a tidal wave of goodness and almost force God's hand to make this world the way it should be. And the Rebbe was frustrated at the end of his life. He's frustrated, it didn't happen. He's very frustrated. And at the end of his life, in the last year, in 1991, a few weeks after Pesach, he said, I've done everything I could. Mashiach's not here. And therefore, I have no choice but to give it to you people. Every individual to be responsible to bring this world to the way it should be. And for years, Chabad and even others didn't understand what was the Rebbe saying. The Rebbe was prophesizing or giving us tools. The metaphor was given. We thought, this is what the line is. We thought the Rebbe was saying, you want to see God, you want to see God's plan, you want to see Mashiach. He was giving us sort of metaphorical binoculars. Here's my teachings, right? We learn every week the Kas Chumash. It's like the Rebbe's are binoculars to see God, or to see the good in the Mashiach. So someone said, this 30 years later, there's a big Zoom discussion. The Rebbe was not giving us binoculars to see Mashiach or to see God or to see our soul. The Rebbe was giving us a microscope. That's an incredible paradigm.
I like that better.
It's all, and every individual can change the world literally today, this very moment. We have to accept that mantle and the responsibility and to go do it.
All right. Well, I'm going to do my microscopic inspection over Shabbat. Shabbat
Amen.
Shalom to you, Rabbi, and to everyone on the.
Shabbos, Rick. Shabbos to everybody. Always a pleasure. Be well.
Good to see you.